In many Native traditions, we say that when we heal, we're healing 7 generations forward and 7 generations back, right? And so what you're speaking to is healing our ancestry and our lineage.
Press the button to begin.
What's up, everybody? You're listening to KQBH-LP, Los Angeles, California, 101.5 FM, a community service of the Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory, broadcasting live on your FM dial and streaming on kqbhla.com. This is your host, Eddie Aguirre. You're listening to The Social Primate. We're back in studio with Leslie, Priscilla, and Fernando Deveras. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys making the trip out of Orange County.
Santana, we got to specify.
More specifically, thank you so much for just making the trip out here. I know it's not necessarily the easiest of times, but with that being said, like, I kind of want to just jump into it. I've been following specifically your page, Fernando, for a little while now, and through that, I ended up learning about Latinx parenting, and I think it was a very interesting way I kind of stumbled into it. I'm a father myself, and I've been dealing with how to approach my son. I have a 13-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I've been figuring out these two different worlds that are like years apart.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to see how I approach the environment that we're currently in. And I feel like there's a lot of information that sometimes gets lost in translation, I guess, because I'm an adult and I'm trying to like show him like, dude, this is a way, like, try to learn about yourself, figure out what it takes, you know, to connect to your identity. And I'm trying to give him tools, but he's very like hesitant to take them right now. So I've been in that path, and that's how I came across your stuff as a father, you know? So give me a little bit of information about how that got started for both of you guys in your respective fields and experiences.
Yeah, I would love for you to start, actually.
I think if we're talking about specifically the parenting work, that would be Leslie's angle. But I can just share a little bit about my background and why I do the kind of things that I do. So in terms of like where I come from, my family is originally from Mexico. My mom came here when she was 7 years old, had me and my brothers when she was in her early 20s. Ended up raising us as a single mom with lots of help from my tios and my tias. And I didn't have that, like when you're talking to your 13-year-old son about connecting with his identity and knowing his roots. I didn't have that when I was younger. I feel like I was like a lot of kids that are in our communities that is just kind of going with what's happening in the neighborhood, what's happening with the fellow classmates in school. So it took me years and years until I finally figured out like what I want to do and what I want to be about. When I went to university, I studied psychology. I learned about sociology. I learned about history. I was big on like the civil rights movement and black liberation movements, the Chicano movement back in the 60s. That was a huge inspiration for me. And I eventually became a teacher. I taught middle school, where I was teaching world history, English, journalism, and other kinds of classes with students, population 70% Latinos, 20% African Americans, 10% everything else in between. And that was for me an early exposure into how do you communicate these ideas to young people. I became a dad when I was 22. So, you know, just around the time that I was graduating with my BA in psych. And so I had to learn that process too of I'm raising a child, not having had a father myself, having had some father figures, but really just trying to figure out how to be the best male figure for my son as I can, knowing what I know and experiencing what I've experienced. I met Leslie around 2022, and so that's when she introduced me to her framework of decolonized parenting. And so I want to pass the mic off to her so she can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. I also have a 13-year-old. So
hey, we know the struggle that we're going to be on.
Yes. But what a joy, right? Like how beautiful it is to have the opportunity, I think, to be able to raise kids who are conscious, like raise kids who are more aware and understand, hopefully, their responsibility to their fellow human. And I also had a long journey to come to some confidence in how I do that, right? Yeah. I was fortunate because I had a very early parenting experience of my little sister. I think a lot of us in the Latino community can kind of relate that a lot of times our initial caregiving experiences were not to our children, but to our younger siblings. And so I knew that I wanted her to grow up feeling a little safer than I felt. My mom at the time really struggled. My dad was also not really in the picture. So I wanted to be that like model for her and have that relationship with her. And so I went to college. I started learning child development. I was really interested in becoming a preschool teacher. I did become a preschool teacher. I was working with kids for a long time, had my own classroom of 4-year-olds. It was a lot of fun. And then I got pregnant when I was a preschool teacher, and I was actually going into college at the time. And so I was like, okay, how am I going to parent and work and go to college? And eventually I left preschool teaching and I just started studying full time. And what I realized was that a lot of times, even in the universities, it wasn't giving me the information that I wanted to have to raise my daughter in a certain way, right? Like with a lot of respect and with a lot of patience. And I did see that they were helpful with it, but I also didn't see like my culture in that experience, right? I didn't really see anything around historical trauma for parents and families or the children, right? At the time I was studying child development. And so I kind of took it upon myself to bring those two things together. I also started recognizing that like I had a lot to heal from, and I started really sitting with like where some of my wounds came from. And it turns out that those wounds came from my mom's wounds, and her wounds came from her parents' wounds and their wounds, right? And so it became this like intergenerational wounding. And so my goal has really been to address that in the Latino community specifically with Spanish-speaking parents and those who work with them. And so I've been doing this work through Latinx parenting since 2018. I've learned so much. I've really kind of recentered it so that it's not so much about the individual relationship that we're having with our children, although that's extremely important. That's like the method through which we want to practice certain liberatory ways of being as parents. But I really want to connect it to this greater social context, right? The historical context, the fact that colonization happened to us and that impacted generations of our parenting. Yeah. And so now we have a generation that is kind of realizing that, right? A lot of us are like looking around like, wait a minute, we don't necessarily need to stay in our trauma ways of being. And so it's been really beautiful to work with the community and see people really ready to have that conversation.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it takes a lot of work to go through all those struggles and those wounds. You know, as somebody who has taken upon themselves to go through that over the last couple of years, it was just a matter of me trying to understand my environment. You know, I think a lot of us, well, we're all born into this system without knowing what things are, right? But a lot of the times we're already placed in these boxes before we even understand what they mean. You know, like one of the first times that I clearly remember being kind of like, I don't know, like stereotyped for some reason, right? I was doing this warehouse job. I was like 15 or something. And this guy, the owner told me, he's like, hey, come with me. We're going to go on a trip to pick up some equipment. And it was a white guy. And then he just asked me like, so what did you do in your life to like avoid gangs? And I was like, what? Like, that's weird. Like, why would you ask that? And then as time went on, I started realizing like, damn, he probably only knows this type of behavior based on what he sees, right? What he's learning. But he's not really living here within our communities to know that we have options of things that we can become. So to me, that always kind of stuck around and kind of helped kind of form the kind of person that I wanted to become. And, you know, just to add some context to that, for a long time during my teen years, I was so against, like, not the culture, but I was hesitant to embrace it. Like, I didn't want to be talking Spanish. Like, I felt some sort of shame, you know? Like, I wanted to assimilate. Like, don't look at me like that. And for a long time, that was my reality until I started growing up and I started realizing, like, whoa, like, I feel this type of way about life because I haven't addressed where this comes from.
Yeah, I think so many people have gone through that journey of recognizing. I went to Catholic school my whole life, you know, and so the good way to be is like light-skinned, like super Christian, super like good girl, right? And so there's a lot of unlearning, I think, that has to be done in the process of teaching our kids. Like at the same time, you have to have so much humility around like what you have absorbed, right? And the unlearning is a process for sure.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't have necessarily that same experience because in my family, the culture was just like kind of a day-to-day thing. You know, the food that we ate, the music that was playing at the parties, my tios, they were all very proud of their culture. And so I feel like maybe I can't necessarily say that was the same experience for me where I felt that shame. I do feel that, again, as I was getting older and trying to figure out who I was pulled to just like the American culture, you know, like hip-hop culture was big for me. And in terms of like stereotypes, I feel like just here, I used to listen to stand-up comedy all the time. So like listening to George Lopez and Carlos Mencia at the time, like those were like the pinnacle Chicano, Latino comedians that made a living off of celebrating all those stereotypes. So I guess like that made me aware of what those stereotypes were. I don't know, and maybe I got some reflecting to do, but I don't know that I ever felt that sense of shame about my culture. I do know that I didn't speak Spanish my early life. And for me, I think that was just the pressure of, English is easier. I go to school and all my friends are speaking English. Everyone on TV is speaking English. The only people who speak Spanish are my tios and my tias, and I only see them every other weekend when there's a birthday party. So I'll focus on my English. I had to learn Spanish later in life, and now I stress it on my boy when I'm like, I need you to know how to speak Spanish because you live in a community where that's how we are building relationships. If you don't speak Spanish, there's a whole lot of people that you're not going to be able to connect with.
Yeah.
So I hear you in terms of like trying to reconnect with our culture, take pride in our culture, and the struggle of helping our children to not just succumb to that pressure of assimilation.
Yeah. No, I think it's good to hear different perspectives of how we were brought up because it only helps connect people listening, you know, like it makes them feel like their experiences have been validated regardless of where they fall, right? And I think that's one of the first steps, I would say, to understanding we're part of this bigger thing, you know, and I think that's when we slowly start chipping away at that kind of stuff and feeling, I don't know, like you're moving with purpose, yes?
Yeah, I think there's like a journey that one goes on as you kind of embrace this idea of decolonization, right? And I think everybody kind of reaches that at a different time in their lives. I've had maestras who have told me that they started in their early 20s, and I feel like I started in my late 20s. And I think parenting actually like was a big catalyst of that because it really causes you to reflect on what values you want to share and why. And so a lot of the tension that you might feel about your culture or your identity like kind of starts in, okay, how do I want to raise my kids? Like, do I want to teach them Spanish? Do I want to embrace certain things do I want to embrace la chancla as a parenting strategy, right? Like I talk a lot about like what I call ending chancla culture because that was really where I started to consider what certain practices were actually adaptations to our survival, right? And so there's also been that unpacking. Sorry, I just hit the mic. There's also been that unpacking about what is actually our culture. And then also how do we take a lot of autonomy back and like power in creating the culture that we want to create, right? Like there are certain things that we must keep. Like our collectivism is so important to us, right? There are certain things that we should not release or replace with maybe more like westernized ideas. But there are some things that we can let go of, right? I'm not talking about our feelings. Certain things that people say, oh, this is our culture, but it's not really our culture. It was an adaptation that helped us survive for centuries.
Mm-hmm. And I want to add to, in terms of like helping people to tap back into that. For me, I think going back to like what I was saying, for me, there were early people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X that I took inspiration from. And when you hear them talk about like white supremacy, naming it, articulating it, what is the impact that white supremacy has on our communities? How does it impact your psychology, where you are looking at parts of yourself as lesser than in comparison to the ideal that is put forth that says you have to look this way, you have to talk this way, you have to act this way. These are the aspirations you need to have. And when you recognize the danger that presents, because we are aligning ourselves with this system that has caused so much harm and devastation and continues to cause harm and devastation. And so if they're saying you have to let go of yourself, you have to let go of your roots to become this, to be successful, to be accepted. And with that comes surrendering, in a way, your humanity, because you're going to have to look away when people who look like you, people who come from communities like yours, like your grandparents, when they are being attacked, like we're seeing right now, you have to look away because you are a part of us now, you know, and that's what you need to strive to be. When I learned about those kinds of messages that we're being indoctrinated with, like you have a choice to make. You know, do you want to fall in line with that or do you want to resist? You know?
Yeah, the resisting, like, you know, just take back what I mentioned earlier. That's, again, I'm going to speak from my own personal experience on that, but that took me a while. I didn't get to that point till my late 20s, early 30s. You know, I'm 35 right now, so it hasn't been that long. But I think it looks different for everybody, first and foremost. I had to put myself in this position where I was, I just had to face realities. And at some point in my life, I kind of embraced the fact that I needed to face the ugliness in order to feel the liberation of who I was, right? I felt like my parents, you know, growing up, they did so much to just survive. They had to assimilate. They didn't think twice about what they had to do. They just know that they needed to keep their head down and keep pushing forward. And when I came to that realization, like, oh, dang, like, I can't blame them for anything because they were doing the best that they could with what they had. You know, and I think that experience opened up my perspective, and especially when I started tackling fatherhood, like it changed everything for me, you know, like I learned this new respect for the elders, you know, for people before me, and how it all impacted me to become who I was. And now it's my job, my responsibility to kind of mold the next generation.
Yeah, and to know how that next generation is also going to influence the next generation and the next generation. And so in many Native traditions, we say that when we heal, we're healing 7 generations forward and 7 generations back, right? And so what you're speaking to is healing our ancestry and our lineage. And Fernando and I do a lot of work around kind of sharing how powerful it is to not only parent differently, but also reparent ourselves, right? And to really recognize what some of that messaging has been in us, that it is better to be skinny, lighter skinned, all of these messages from white supremacy. It's better to be a man, even in Latino culture, right? We still have a lot of machismo. I think that's changing, and I'm very excited to see that changing. But there are some things that we have absorbed, right? And so there is no guilt and no shame in the recognition of that, although we might feel that initially. I think, especially me as like a white presenting Latina, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, I actually like benefited from the system of white supremacy in certain ways, and I have to contend with that. I have to look at that and acknowledge it, but also know that I'm a model for not just me, but so many other people who have done this, for being able to acknowledge it, right? And do it in a way where we're not ashamed of the ways that we have perpetuated some of these things: anti-indigeneity, anti-Blackness, religious dogmas that maybe have been harmful to some family members of ours. So it's such a complex journey. Like it's such a, I always say, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's such a journey. But it really is. I don't think that we'll ever be done doing that inner work, right? And we shouldn't be done doing that inner work, because I think in every stage of life, like you're meeting yourself in new ways. And I think now, as I have a 13-year-old, I'm having to recognize the way that my inner 13-year-old niña shows up, right? And what belongs to me and what no longer belongs to me. And so I just feel grateful for that opportunity to be able to have relationship with my children, and now your son, in that way.
Specifically for you, Fernando, at some point we're receivers of just information, but at one point in our life, I feel like we got to evolve to become the ones that provide the tools to somebody else rather than just taking, right? So like at what moment did you feel like that connected with you? Like you felt like you had to be of service rather than just a consumer of it, of this information?
Damn. So I mentioned that I'm a teacher. I've been working with kids in the education space since I was like 18 years old. And it started because when I was in middle school, I was in the Boys and Girls Club. And I really loved that experience because there was like these adults that I could build relationships with, that I could trust, you know. And so when I got older, I was like, I want to do that. I want to be that for somebody else. So I signed up to work as an after-school instructor. From there, I went on to work as a assistant in a special needs classroom, and eventually became a teacher. And that experience of being a teacher and just recognizing that I want to be in a position where I can help guide people in the way that I wish someone had been there to guide me. Because there's things that I've had the opportunity to learn, and through experience and through research, I've learned these things. I don't know everything, but I know some things that I wish I had known sooner. So how can I help others to speed up their process and to not have to trip over the same roadblocks that I tripped over on the way? Right now, a lot of the work that I do to educate people is through the social media page on Instagram, and this is like by no means a full-time gig. This is something that we try to do when we have time between raising our kids, maintaining the business that we operate. But I want to share whatever knowledge I have, right? I think it's really just about knowing the power that lies there, that there's a lot of power that comes when people are educated on their history of not just what has happened to us in terms of like what Leslie was sharing, the impacts of colonization, the impacts of discrimination, but also how have people fought back? How have we been able to organize as our communities to resist these systems that are trying to keep us down? I always mention the Black Panther Party as a huge inspiration. Anybody who's listening that hasn't done research on the Black Panther Party, I say start there. When they were creating health clinics for their people, feeding hungry kids with their school breakfast program, doing political education to make sure that their whole community understood what is happening, why it's happening, and what we can do about it. I feel like those templates are there, but they're buried, and they don't teach it to you in school. You know, they're in school. They're teaching you the Pledge of Allegiance and whatever standards and curriculum is pumped out there, and you have to dig for this information.
Yeah.
You have to dig for the truth. We want to be in a position where if we've been able to uncover some truths, we want to help other people to uncover those truths. I think it's really just about how we can build more people power. And I see education as a way to do that. And I see that I have a capacity to do that, to break things down. Having been a middle school teacher for as long as I was, talking to 11, 12, 13-year-olds about world history and world religions and government systems. If I can explain it to an 11-year-old, I can explain it to a 20, 30, 40-year-old.
Right, yeah.
You know?
Just real quick on that. I don't, my oldest son doesn't live with me. So, I pick him up from school and throughout the week. But those moments that I get when I'm taking him to school, those 15 minutes in the mornings, I'm always bombarding him with do you know what's going on with this? Like last time we were talking about gentrification and he was just like, oh, Dad, I have to get to school. But a couple of weeks later, he's like, Dad, guess what we're learning today? What is it? Gentrification. You already taught me about it. I was like, yes. That made me feel like, it made me feel good, because I didn't have that growing up. Nobody ever talked to me about those concepts. But the fact that I was providing some sort of information, whether he was keeping it in his mind or not, it subconsciously was like, wait a second, I've heard of this. And then, I don't know, it kind of just, first and foremost, it builds that fatherhood connection. Like, oh, damn, my dad is a resource here, And I'm just trying to give him the ability to critically think about these things. And, I think that's what we all kind of have to focus on, even if we don't have kids.
That reminded me of an experience with my boy. So again, my boy's like 10 years old. And same thing, I've had to, and we could talk a little bit more about that, about how do we avoid bombarding our kids so that they don't hear us open our mouths and go, oh, dang, here comes another lesson. Because that's happened to me plenty of times. But I had that experience where I taught him about colonization. I taught him about where our people come from and the fact that we have mixed heritage, where we do have European ancestry, very likely. I asked my grandma, what are we? She's like, mestizo. I was like, all right, cool. So I'm a little bit of something. But I taught him about that. And, he, if you do it enough times, he's rolling his eyes. He doesn't care. But then he goes to school. Hey, Dad, what do we learn about colonization? I already knew this stuff because he already broke it down for me. So he gets that point of pride, I think, when there's that validation that, oh, this isn't just my dad trying to bore me with something. This is actually applicable. And people outside of my immediate family also care about this. And then also, when you talk about, my dad's a resource, it's weird because I talk about local politics a lot. And so my boy goes to a school in our city where a lot of the parents are following our accounts on social media. And so they're like, oh, my friends say that their parents watch you on TikTok and Instagram. And so, again, he's saying oh, it's not just my dad talking politics out into the ether, out into some void. No, there's people who are listening to this. And I know, again, he's young, he's learning. He will get to the point where he's going to see, okay, this is why he was doing what he was doing. I don't need to rush him to get there. I don't need him to understand every detail. But I'm glad that he's finally at an age now where he's starting to make those connections and see where this is coming from,
Yeah. Do you have any experiences that you want to share, Leslie?
Yeah, I have a lot of experiences. I just wanted y'all to vibe on the fatherhood, though. I was like, okay, I like this, because I feel like I have a lot of conversations, mostly with moms. I feel like a lot of times it's the moms that are coming to me, and so this is really nice, where we're talking about the fatherhood. But I think for me, because of where we live, you can't help but talk about these hard things. You go a block around the corner and you see an unhoused person sleeping on the sidewalk. You drive down today. I was driving down Flower in Santa Ana, and there was the National Guard, right? And so I had this conversation with my co-parent because we have co-parenting situations as well. And so we were he was sharing that he wasn't sure that the kids were ready necessarily. And I said, well, of course they're ready because this is the reality. This is the environment that they're in. And it's not like I'm constantly look at this, and flashing it in their face. But they sense me too, right? And so when I'm a little bit stressed, my daughter, my 13-year-old daughter especially, she'll say, what's going on? What's, you seem a little tense. And I'll be like, I'm really stressed out because of what's happening in Gaza right now. I'm really stressed out about what's happening in our city right now. I'm really, Fernando got hit by a rubber bullet on his knee. That sucked, so... There's conversations where we have to have them because it is our reality and this is who we are, me and him together, right? And as individuals as well. And so I always tell parents, I'm like, it's really not about what you are doing with your children. It's more about who you are being, right, around your children. And so it's what you're embodying. It's the values that you're actually holding and practicing. And that is the hardest thing, because you could tell your kids, you could say, hey, you know, we need to humanize people and we need to have relationships like this and we need to do everything in these ideal ways. But if you're not actually practicing that at home, right? If you're fighting up against the National Guard, or, you know, you're throwing water bottles or whatever at the police, but then you go home and you're in a power dynamic with your children where they don't trust you and they may want to be resisting you as well, right? How do you handle that? And so I see parenting really, and like the relationship that we have with our children and other children as well, because we have nieces and nephews and all kinds of other children in our lives. But the way I see it is that relationship really is the model, the template for all of your other relationships, right? The relationship that you have with yourself, with your children, with your most intimate people in your life, that can be extrapolated all the way to government relationships with their people, right? So people who are in positions of power, how do you, you know, not become the authoritarian in your house, right? And so I think that kind of holds me accountable to be able to make sure that my kids are aware they're also half white, right? Their father is full European white. And so my priority is also to ensure that they recognize their privilege and the power that they have, and that they look at me as somebody who models how to use that power, right? And so, but yeah, it's something that happens in context. That education happens in context.
Yeah, I do like how you brought up the point where at the end of the day, of course we're going to be parents. We're going to be, we have to nurture our little ones, right? But if we're not focusing on ourselves as well, or like I said, you know, practicing what we're preaching, like that's not going to make an effect long term. I've been trying to expose my kid when it's safe to do so, like protests early on in the mornings, like bring them, just have them exposed to it, you know, just to see what's going on. Like the first time I was involved in a protest was when I was like 15, and that was like 2005. I think it's 2005, 2006 when those walkouts happened. And I've talked about this on the show where I was like, I didn't really care about it, but I didn't know why, you know, and then I found out about it and I was like, dude, I'm part of something big here. I'm just one small piece in all of this. Yeah. And that's what I'm trying to show him. You know, he's super light skinned. If you saw him, he looked like a little white boy. Mm. And they pick on him for that. They're like, oh, you're white, you're whitito. And then he's like,
yeah, kids can be mean.
Yeah. What was Emilio telling? My 6-year-old was telling Fernando, like, why can't I be more brown?
Oh, yeah. We were talking about like the science of pigment and, you know, why melanin and why certain people are darker skin and other people are lighter skin. He's like, so if I stand in the sun longer, does that mean I can be dark like you? I was like, you don't have to aspire to be dark like me. But
I'm like, yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Yeah, it was nice to flip the script a little bit.
Well, because for so long we were told, you know, mejora la raza, right? Mm-hmm. Like marry white, like make sure that you marry into whiteness. And I did, right? I listened to that. I was like, okay, cool, I'm good. And then you realize like how much of yourself you have to reject to like really be in that system. And so now I tell my daughter, and I'm half joking, like she can be with whoever she wants really, but I'm like, okay, you know, you're going to be with somebody who's like darker skin, okay? We're going to go the other way. I have to be really explicit about we're reversing it. We got to reverse it. Yeah. And I'm totally joking for everybody out there, like, and she knows that I'm joking, but yeah, it's interesting to like have those conversations, because I do tell her also, I'm like, you know what, when I was growing up, it was always the ideal to marry into a white family and to make sure that that family had the resources and the means to take care of you and all these things. So as I'm healing and as I'm unlearning, I'm also communicating that in a very transparent and age-appropriate way, right? Yeah. I'm not telling her every single thing, but I am being very open, right, about my own journey so that she also has the language around processing hers. Yeah.
But sorry, you were talking about the protests and trying to bring your kids in that. Like, I want to if you want to finish the point, because I feel like I want to add a little something to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the biggest point to me was exposing him to these different types of just movements, of just ways of thinking, you know? One thing just to kind of add on to that, it's been a year and a half now with the whole Palestine genocide going on. Yeah. Early on, he was getting, I guess, reports from the school saying like, oh, well, Israel's getting attacked. And that was the narrative that the school was telling the students, apparently. And I was like, what? Like, that got me mad, because it's like, no, that's not the reality of things, right? And he told me, too, that on TikTok, kids were watching videos of the killings. Yeah. And the kids were laughing. And I told my son, I was like, well, how do you feel about that? I was like, well, you've talked to me about it. I think this is really messed up, you know? Like, and I was like, okay, cool. At least he has some sort of empathy, because he's able to understand that this isn't a joke. And I think that only comes from being able to have somebody, again, that you can have these kind of conversations with. age appropriate, of course, not showing like the brutality of it, but at the end of the day, still at least making them aware of it.
Mm-hmm. I think the point that you're making about like sometimes you don't have a choice about whether or not to introduce them to certain things or expose them to certain things. They're going to school and they're watching videos on TikTok, and you can't hide that from them. What can we do to help them navigate that, to help them understand what they're seeing, how they can tap into their emotions, remember that these are human beings on the other side of the screen. I remember, like, when you're young, I feel like the world is very kind of, especially when you're watching it through a screen, you're very desensitized to the kind of things. I remember my uncles used to, not a great example, by the way, they used to show us like Faces of Death and things.
Faces of Death, damn, bro.
Yeah. And
Wait, do you remember Rotten.com? Like I was exposed to that really early.
Yeah. I was like 11.
11, yeah.
So we see that, and we played video games like Mortal Kombat, and so you become desensitized to that if you don't have somebody there to remind you, to ground you, to pull you back to earth and say, this is a human being. That's somebody's mother, somebody's father, somebody's kid. Yeah, that's important to remember. And, when you were saying about just like bringing your kids out to protests and things, that's something I had to learn myself, because I feel like I got very invested in early movements like, softer things like the Bernie Sanders campaign, 2016, 2020. Mm-hmm. My boy was born 2014, so when I was knocking on doors in 2020, he was there tagging along with me. So he's getting introduced to local politics. That he doesn't know everything that's happening, but he understands what I'm doing and talking to people about, policies. Like 2019, I'm learning about like the Sunrise Movement and talking about climate change. And again, he's young, he's 5 years old at this point, but this is the world that he's growing into. And I'm taking time on weekends to go to these different events. And so I'm either leaving him at home with his mom and I want him to understand where I'm going, or he's coming with me and I need him to know what the scene is. And then 2020, Black Lives Matter protests, I was out on the street all the time, and I had to make that choice. Like, do I bring my boy or do I leave him at home? And there were a few protests where I did end up bringing him. Like I remember there was like a skateboarding protest, skating to the police department, and he knew how to skate. So I was like, hey, we're taking our skateboards, let's go. It's a field trip. But then there were other moments where I would bring him and you scan and you're like, okay, this isn't necessarily a kid-safe space, so let me pull you out of here. And that, I'd say, having met Leslie in 2022, I'm a lot more conscious and a lot more sensitive to how is he feeling here. It's not just, is this what I think is important for him to see and experience and know? It's, how's he feeling? What's he ready for? Does he really need this right now, here and now? Mm-hmm. And we were talking about like when Leslie's driving down the street and her kids see the National Guard. When you're that close to it, when you're that close to what's happening, there has to be some kind of communication. We can shield them from some things. There's other things where it's right there in front of them. Mm-hmm. And they're going to have questions. They're going to be curious. They want to understand what's in front of them. And that's where we step in.
What's coming to mind is that video that came up where Kim Kardashian and her daughter were looking at the comments on a TikTok live, and everybody was sending the Palestine flag, and she said, "That's what?" Did she say?
Her daughter was like, "What's that flag?"
What's that flag?
And Kim's like, "Oh, that's Brazil."
That's Brazil.
Oh my God.
That's Brazil. And so, that's like what we're combating, right? Like that's really what we're up against, because there's so many families. There are so many families that actually do not have these conversations because they don't have to, because they live on hills, right? Because they live far away from it. And so I'm very intentional, I think, about really centering the fact, again, that you can't just live in a silo. You can't just participate in this toxic system of individualism, right, at the extreme where you're completely removed from the things that are happening in the world, right? And so I have a lot of beef with the white parenting coaches specifically, because the focus is so much on emotional intelligence and, raising children in this gentle parenting way. And yet there's a complete neglect of the fact that there are Palestinian children that are being bombed right now, right? And so that is a huge disconnect to me. I don't just see it in the parenting world. We see it in the mental health field. We see it in the education space. We see it, and you have a story, right, of a teacher that didn't want to talk to their students about certain things. And so we have to see that as like a Goliath, right? We have to see that as like we are up against this these systems that really are like monsters, like these giants, right? And we have our slingshots and we're throwing slingshots at these giants, but if enough of us are doing that, at some point that giant will fall, right? And so I see the way that we raise children as resistance for sure.
I don't know if you wanted to bring that story up.
Well, I kind of want to just say, I can share that story.
Yeah.
There was a moment where when I was teaching middle school, and it's Hispanic Heritage Month, and I had two colleagues that were both white women, and they were the very nice teachers. They cared about their students. They made sure that their kids enjoyed coming to class, but there were certain areas that they were nervous about touching. So when I was like, hey, what are you doing for Hispanic Heritage? I got some lessons y'all can check out, this and that. And she said, I don't know if I want to talk about that. I feel like I'm going to say something wrong and I'm going to offend somebody. So I'm just not going to touch it. I'm going to focus on the curriculum. And there were other instances where I had LGBTQ students that were looking for a space. They're like, I don't know which teachers I could trust. I don't know if I can talk to this teacher about what's going on. My parents, if they find out, they're going to be upset, this and that. And so I created a club where students could meet once a week and we'd just talk about things. And they could just hang out and play games with each other. And I would ask teachers around campus, hey, how do y'all feel about supporting? Like, at the very least, just have a flag in your room to let them know that you're an ally. And there were some teachers who were like, yeah, I'm down. And there were other teachers that were like, no, thank you. And just, I could go on when COVID hit. How are y'all talking to your kids about COVID? I'm leaving that to the experts. How are you talking to them about Black Lives Matter? When we were doing virtual classes, and again, 20% of our kids are African-American, and all the other kids are seeing it on the news and on social media. I was like, how are y'all talking to about it? It's not my business. So there is a Goliath, like Leslie said, of people who are far enough removed from the pain where they don't have to address it. And they feel that it isn't their responsibility to address it. The mayor in our city, Valerie Mesqua, when the assault on Gaza started, we were out organizing with Palestinians in the community, calling for a ceasefire, a resolution from the city calling for a ceasefire. And her response was, I'm the mayor of this city. That's not my job. Another council member, Phil Becerra, said, we're not here to play model UN. And we're like, they're so far removed from it that they can just look away. And that's the challenge for us as parents, too, is we need our children to feel safe. We want them to enjoy their youth and their childhood. We also want them to grow up with that recognition that they have a responsibility to care for others, that they cannot just, like Leslie was saying, silo themselves off. You are a part of a collective, a broader collective, a collective humanity. So how do we do that in a way that respects their, how do we say it? Like their humanity, the humanity of our kids,
Yeah, and the autonomy through which they move through those things, right? Because there have been times where my 13-year-old or, one of the kids will say, I don't want to talk about that right now. You have to respect that, right? You can't take that personally. You have to understand that there is a time and a place. And so a lot of the work that we do, especially right now in the courses that we're teaching a series right now called Seeds of Liberation. And so it's all about this, right? It's all about how do we help our children? How do we guide our children through these times in a way that's respectful of them, and then also where we can generate some confidence, right? A lot of it is like, I don't know how to talk to them, so I'm not going to. Well, how do we become confident, right? What's the language that we can use? How do we recognize what's coming up for us and our inner child as well as we're having these conversations? If, for example, it's not comfortable for me to talk about sex, right? That's something that sometimes parents struggle with. How do I talk to my children about sex or pornography or these things? And so a lot of the work is just gaining confidence around it, right? How do you talk to yourself about some of these things, right? What can you learn about some of these things where you can feel more confident? And so we recognize also that that's a privilege for a lot of parents, right? Sometimes there are parents who maybe have more than one job and aren't spending that much time with their kids. And so we place a lot of emphasis on making sure that parents don't feel fully responsible for these things, because sometimes we really do need the teachers, right? Sometimes we need the tios and tias to know some things and to have these conversations with their kids. There are people in the courses that we take that are not parents and that just want to know how to guide the young people in their lives, whether they're related or not. And so we really appreciate that and want to make sure that continues to happen.
Now, I know we've been talking about the youth, but I think one big focus, too, is just adults as individuals, right? Because we're supposed to be the ones who have, air quotes, answers, the ones who have this wisdom, right? But, as we go through life, we start seeing that in reality, nobody really has a clue. We're all really just trying to figure it out. but there is some people that put more effort into trying to understand it rather than just being passive, you know? Now, from your experiences, what has been like the approach that works best when you're catering to adults?
Dang, that's a broad. I feel like it depends. Every adult's different, you know? I'm thinking back to during the Black Lives Matter protests, I was one of the people who, like, for research purposes, really, I'd go to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
People waving Blue Lives Matter flags and Trump flags because it was an election year. And I'd talk to them. And I think something that helps is some people like to debate lord it out. I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but, like, you know, they want to plant the gotcha questions. They want to make you look stupid.
Yeah.
I come at them like a human being. And again, this is not for everybody. I don't recommend that everybody goes out there trying to convert the people on the other side. That's not a useful use of our time. But if you are trying to reach somebody, when I would have these conversations, I think the number one thing for me would just be you're empathizing with them on a human level. I'm making eye contact with you. I'm going to shake your hand.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to speak calmly. I'm going to give you your space. I'm going to give you room to talk. And I need you to see that I'm coming in this earnestly, trying to reach some sort of understanding so that you can come in earnestly to reach some understanding. You know, we have to, you know, in the work that we do, we talk about serving as a mirror for the people in front of us, because whatever energy we bring into the space, that's the energy they're going to match us with.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that I really try to do. Another thing is just, like Leslie was saying, do your research. You have to really know what you're talking about, because when you know something, you know, in and out, and you're talking to somebody who is going off of talking points, going off of just some narrative that they might have been hearing on the sidelines or as they're swiping on their phones, you're going to see where the holes are in their understanding. And all you have to do is present those holes to them in a respectful way. I remember during the organizing work that we were doing with Palestinians, there would be nice white neighbors in neighborhoods where we were protesting. We were protesting in front of Congressmember Lou Correa's house. He's a representative in our district who does a lot of great work for the community, but on the issue of Palestine happens to side with Israel and stays quiet. So we're protesting in front of his house. It's one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city, Floral Park. And we have nice white neighbors who come out and say, you know, I just think it's a mess what's happening over there, but, you know, they got to release the hostages and they have to. And then I'd be like, do you know when Hamas started? No. Do you know why the year 1948 is significant? No. And you kind of just, again, in a very calm way, and you start to point out those holes in their understanding. It's not to make you look stupid. Mm-hmm. It's to make them understand there's some more you have to learn about this. And maybe you need to ask us questions, you know, rather than just assuming that you have the full picture here. So those are two things I would highlight. You know, I can go on, but I want to let Leslie have a chance to answer that.
Yeah. So I was taught by a woman named Ruth Beaglehole, who did a lot of work in this community, actually. She was the founder of an organization called the Center for Nonviolent Parenting and Education, which eventually became Echo Parenting. And her framework is around needs, right? Her framework basically states that all behavior is a strategy to meet a need. And so that's universal. That's whether you're talking about a child, an adolescent, an adult, an elder, right? Everybody is just trying to meet their needs. And so for me, it's been really helpful to have a language around those needs, right? And to say, okay, I understand that by joining the military, you're wanting a sense of security, you're wanting a sense of belonging, you're wanting a sense of pride in who you are and your identity, right? You're wanting to contribute, right? There's this like long list of individual universal human needs. And so when you can pinpoint that a behavior is connected to a need, you can better have that conversation with an adult. You can say, I understand what you're needing here, right? I understand how this behavior is a strategy to meet that need. Are there other strategies where that need could be met, right? Could we, it's like a kid, right? You wanted the toy from your sister, so you hit her to get that toy. Like, we don't necessarily need to do that. Yeah. Some adults need that kind of coaching still. When it comes to those bigger things, right, that there are other strategies to meet needs, that also that your needs not being met sometimes is a perception. Billionaires feel like they're not safe until they have billions and billions of dollars. That's a perception that you have around your need. In reality, you're actually safe, right? In reality, you're actually okay. And so I approach it that way. And I also approach it recognizing that a lot of times we're not talking to adults, we're talking to wounded inner children, right? I see the ways that sometimes our leaders have really manifested a lot of the wounds that they have experienced either through systemic harm or in their individual childhoods and, their parents or their teachers or whoever. And they didn't fully heal from that. And so now it sometimes will get taken out on the communities, right? We see that in our mayor currently. And I'm going to say that. And and it's interesting because I know her on a personal level. I've known her since I was 5 years old. And so I just am seeing how it's all unfolding now, just really understanding the history. If you look at the history of Adolf Hitler, if you look at the history of even Donald Trump, like you see that there was a sequence of events that happened that distorted their perception of their needs being met or not met. Right. And so when you're talking to other adults, it's super helpful to have that framework. It's also to recognize that a lot of the behavior is coming from a place of woundedness, right? A place of scarcity, a place of this, what Ruth would call the dominant paradigm, right? That makes us compete, makes us feel like we don't have enough resources. And so that's how I approach it with adults. When I'm sitting with parents, when I'm sitting with other adults, we talk about needs.
One thing I guess I can kind of pull from this is just like, and I think I might have read it somewhere on your website, something about reflection as a political act or something like that. And the way I interpreted that was, I don't think a lot of us have the time for reflection because we're like on the grind. I noticed that when I was with my first kid, I was working, I used to get home late or leave early to work. And I felt like time just kind of slipped by, right? And now with my 1-year-old, I'm trying to like be as available as possible. Like I'll get up in the nights, I'll do the bottle feeding, when he needs to, or when he was a little baby, because I missed that with my first kid, and I felt like I needed to reconnect, but I didn't really get the chance to do that reflection while I was in it in the beginning, and I felt like, I don't know, that can seem like a luxury sometimes to some folks. I feel like for my parents, it was a luxury because they were on full survival mode, right? They didn't have the time to slow down, take a breath. And I have that luxury, and I have that privilege now to do it. And I feel like, I don't know, sometimes it's robbed from us and we don't get to these levels of mental clarity because we're just stuck in this system.
Yeah, there's a lot of grief in that. Yeah, like there's a lot of recognizing. I think about my parents and my mom especially. My mom was from Chihuahua, Mexico. She had to come here at the age of 14 because her father had died. And there were 6 children under her that she had to work to feed, to help my tita feed. And so as an adolescent, I think that there was a lot that I resented, right? I was like, oh my gosh, how could she treat me like this? I'm her child. And then I had my daughter and I looked at her and she was this beautiful newborn. And I was like, how could my mom do this? Even more, right? I was like, oh my gosh, how could my mom do this? And then over time, you do start to recognize that a lot of it was out of a need to survive, as you said earlier. And so that helps the compassion piece, right? It's never going to be about blaming our parents or blaming our ancestors because, once again, their goal was to survive and to protect us. And so the behaviors that manifested out of that, they were often misguided, right? A lot of times people will say, oh, well, you shouldn't parent with fear and you shouldn't parent with threats and things like that. And so I want people to recognize that a lot of times when they're parenting with fear, they're actually parenting also with love and a want to protect their children, right? And this happens in the Black community too, when parents will say, if I don't teach you this way, then somebody else is going to teach you worse, right? And so that comes from a place of wanting to protect. I hold no resentment anymore towards my mom. Sometimes it hurts. Like sometimes there is grief that I still feel, but part of this is knowing how to navigate that grief, right? Not to let it drown you, right? I see it as like a lake, and it's like, okay, we can dip our toes into that lake and we can feel it sometimes. We can say, it kind of hurts that my parents didn't have that, and it hurts that I didn't know the things that I knew either, and that, I went down certain roads that I shouldn't have gone down. There's grief in that, but grief is like a friend, you sit down next to that grief, you have a conversation with that grief, and then you move into creating new things, right, from that. And so there is a lot of grief, right? There's a lot of hard reflection to do.
Yeah. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think when you're talking about the fact that this is a luxury, it's a privilege for a lot of people to have this reflection. Having had the opportunity to go to university, my mom did not go to university. She was cleaning houses to make sure that me and my brothers could eat. Yeah. And then she went on to work a factory job to make sure that we had health insurance. And she didn't have experience growing up where her mom and her dad were always there and taking care of her and loving her. And so, she didn't have time to reflect. My grandma didn't have time to reflect. I, having had that opportunity, I'm trying to do what I can now. And again, I still have room to grow. I think we recognize that we are in a position, we're a very privileged position to have this space. And what we try to do in the work that we do is not just on an individual level say we want people to reflect and to do better. We also want to recognize what are the conditions, the material conditions around our families that are putting us in this position in the first place. If your mom is having to work 2 jobs, why is that? Why can't she survive on 1 job? If your mom is at risk of being deported, why is that? Why are we living in a community where she has to look over her shoulder as she's going to the grocery store? And what does that stress do to her?
Yeah.
And so then what can we do to make sure that she feels safe, that she feels supported, that she has community, that she has the resources that she needs to feel good in herself so that she can be the best version of herself for her children? And that's really what we try to stress. When I met Leslie, I feel like it was a merger of the work that she does in trying to heal our families from these deep wounds that we carry, and also the organizing advocacy component, where what are we going to be doing to move these politicians, to move these budgets, to move these policies so that our families can live more comfortably, more securely, and not have to be just struggling to survive.
It's about needs.
Yeah. You guys, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. Outside of that, where can people find you? Or if they want to have, get more information on Instagram or anything, where can people pick up on that?
Oh, I'll let Leslie go first. Go ahead.
Sure. So Instagram is really where we spend a lot of our time. Admittedly, sometimes I don't like that, that we're spending that much time. But they can find us on Instagram. They can also find us on our website, which is latinxparenting.org. And then you can find me on my personal page as well, which is just Leslie Priscilla. I also want to name that I'm having a book released next September 2026. It's called Chancla. It's about the evolution of parenting in Latino communities and a lot of the things that we've talked about. So be on the lookout for that. And then do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think for me, the main place people can find me on Instagram, Fernando Deveras. And if you're ever in Santana, just, if there's a protest out there, just look for the guy with the beard and you can spot me there.
Hit us up.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much again for making the time. Everybody else, you're listening to The Social Primate on KQBHLP, Los Angeles, California, 101.5 FM. Catch you guys next week.
Every man's heart one day beats its final beat. His lungs breathe their final breath. And if what that man did in his life makes the blood pulse through the body of others, it makes them bleed deeper in something than larger than life, then his essence, his spirit will be immortalized.
You think you know me?
Entering the ring like a heavyweight champion, legendary king like my name is Fred Hampton. Vision of a sniper, Taino in my fibers. I can see the truth, no Roddy Piper. Black brown messiah, one-on-one with the colonizer. Ropes on fire, tombstone pile driver. Disciples assemble in Mayan symbols deciphered. Sacred prayers delivered, fulfill fate's desires. As the crowd gets louder, feels wild nostalgic. Lift 'em up, gorilla press, fearless as a falcon. Catch the BX live on BBC. That's when I hit 3DTs with DDTs. El Patron without Patron. For sovereignty, we work hustles and cross the border like take on the turnbuckle. Hit 'em with a spear, then a chair, let 'em chair. Administer my finisher, the signature, and it's severe.
Yeah. Check it.
You think you know me?
Abysmal with a pistol, execute corporates in front of poverty. I mean, lyrically, I'm twisted, sea demon, heretic, embellishing the savagery repeatedly. Stab a chest cavity, I run with the spirits, they burn at the stake. Cushion until death, like Hod's way, we build raw, ambush, mercenary convoys. Fallujah, oh forward, I'm on boy. Fuck Judge Dredd, leave a judge dead. Break down gates of heaven, leave them all red. Yes, the rhythm, the rebel. B-boy, changing levels, shooting for a double. Like a barrel, leave them riddled, let the rodents fiddle. In your vicinity, public enemy smashing. Burn it all down, see what grows from the ashes. Native threat, KF, hell yeah, they don't know what time it is. Yeah, get this shit.
You think you know
The first infinite earth resistance grew out the 8 when resonate with persistence. Grooves to the hate they throw with my mission. Born to flip what they did with theirs. I'm only mad cause I care. I'm only mad cause I know what's out there. And it ain't fair to grab a mask and a spear. I'm unattached to the fear. Fuck I look like sipping on a colonizer beer. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. Talking about a virus. Y'all act like you got closed eyelids. And what I find is they don't know what the time is. I'm an ancestor, I am timeless. I look within and the answers I find them. I'm not lost, I know the cost. Robbery is haunting me. I'm Undertaker, choke slam the boss. Leave you hung in the ring, I don't give a fuck. And that's what's up, to the day I'm done. Cause no one
can escape death. Death's got the book us all around us. And the ancestors are with us. So Hawan, put your feathers on and let them know what's up.
You think you know?
This is Danza Azteca ceremony on the campus by the marigold flowers is where we lead the dances. I'm at war with Anglo-Saxons and our weapons have landed. Pre-Hispanic savage turn them Yankees into ashes. It's revenge for the sanctions that they put on Venezuela. En el Tahuantín suyo, el condor vuela. Plumas tied to the blower from a scarlet ibis. My medicine bag carries dreams inside it. Flower making preparation for the day of the dead. The reputation of my nation's what I swore to defend. The promise of death is what the mask represents. The liquor isn't needed to put me at ease. You can't wear my mascara, it belongs to a king. Yo, I was taught to love the US, I was raised a little different. I was taught to keep them fucking colonizers to a distance. Them gringo spies wanna know who sent us. You'll have to take my life before you take my feathers.
I'm wide, I'm out on bail. The sheriffs try to unmask me. Sister in arms, Frosty. Talk to him, hermana.
You think you
Ain't
know?
got no papers for you to funnel me into your system. Assimilate my soul to psychological prison. Fuck your religion and all the blood on its hands. Your secret cemeteries where the spirits still dance. They offered money for our heads, put targets on our backs. So we lived in the shadows, whispering plans of attack. We withdraw, you react. A gabacho gets slapped. Step back, motherfucker, you don't know me like that. This is my form of decrement and broken social agreements. You baby bloodsucker leeches, pervert political leaders, sinning as hard as the preachers. Only God can judge how your heart full of hate, but your mouth speaking love. I don't need to go to heaven, see I'm calling all your bluff. Maybe we can stop pretending, see my people had enough. Yes, all one love, but you still gotta duck. Better watch the way you move before they get you with the
Yeah, that's right. Women are freedom fighters too. Navy Jones, you know what the fuck to do.
You think you know me?
Ooh, it's Mr. Diamond Moolah with the dirty ruga. Yo soy boricua, still a nigga with a sick medulla. My skin's a sin, the jinx be trying to genocide. A real nigga, and I say that with pride. This is it, boy. The new age revolution fighters get a grip, boy. Shooting in and out the gym, the clips don't miss, boy. I'm moving stealth like a real shooter. Might drop a bomb on a border wall abuser. Unify the people was Pride and Fred Hampton. Climbing up a ladder, took an axe to my stanchion. Didn't know that I would bounce back deadly fashion. Mask on, stash it, pistol blast and passion. They say you could be anything that you put your mind to, but mind you, since the boat had a mouth full of swan dude. Jaganator coming through like Macho Man and UT. With a Booker T, you cross us wrong, you go 6 feet.
Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, is that who's that, Rex? Okay, let's go. Yeah, Rex, check these motherfuckers out here.
You think you know me?
Don't bother Rex, rip your heart from your chest. You want pain? Well then I leave my name carved in your flesh. They say sleep is the father of death. Why would you bother the best? I keep a bag of tools, carpenter vet. I clothesline, so I just slaughter the rest. Dinos and Aztecs, blast text if I send out this mass text. I fight sobriety, mass stress. I'm trying to move the culture forward. Conscious aura, death to who came before us. In blood I paint the forest, then cover my face, absorb it. Feel the torment of my bloodline. Sacrificed, I'm a martyr. Free Palestine. And if the media too promotes slander, that's what the media do. Instead of exposing the truth, we get shot and killed, controlled like a zoo. But let nationalists march the capital, holding the noose. I lace my boots and prepare for the rivalry. The spirits inside of me, guiding me. Man, they gotta be the God of me.
Hey yo, Jag, Dre, I see the play. Building an army of indigenous snipers. Salute to the comrades. Azomali, talk to them.
You think you know me?
Phonetic aggression, poetic aggression. My sharpened bone helped me pass through the metal detector. When I die, I hope the flowers in the ghettos connect us. So you'll be lost in the puddle of ancestral nectar. Listen, the mangoes grow in the ground that I walk on. My battle scars now have became my sakya. Carrying my lyrics like I turned to an Oscar. You can meet me somewhere in the middle of Aslan. The Molotov cocktail, we're hating the cop car. Whether you're screaming Omidale or Allahu Akbar. When I'm coming to kill you, believe it will not spar. Whether you hit the right jab or down with the southpaw. Keep going, we live inside a world that's without stars. Clouds fall, the child's tears going all out war. White something I keep the mask inside of the house for. What you know about less in the day in the outdoors? Pulling with the mask and I feel like I'm Jack Wall.
Manifest destiny. I'm your enemy. Your natural enemy. Manifest destiny. We are your enemies. Your natural enemies. Your natural enemies. Your natural enemies. Your natural enemy.